The crystal glasses shattered against the marble floor like 1,000 broken dreams, and Maya Thompson stood frozen as the cold champagne dripped down her uniform while her heart pounded so loud she thought everyone in the fancy restaurant could hear it. The tall white man in the expensive suit towered over her with his face twisted in anger and his finger pointing at her like a weapon as he screamed words that cut deeper than any knife could ever reach. "You incompetent fool! Do you have any idea who I am? I'm Richard Caldwell, the CEO of Caldwell Industries. I could buy this pathetic little restaurant 10 times over and still have change for lunch." His voice echoed through the silent dining room, where 50 pairs of eyes watched the young black waitress tremble while tears threatened to spill from her beautiful brown eyes, but she held them back because Maya Thompson had learned long ago that showing weakness only made cruel people crueler. Her long black curly hair had come loose from its bun during her desperate attempt to balance the tray, and now it fell around her shoulders like a dark waterfall while she bent down to pick up the broken glass with shaking hands, because even though this man had just humiliated her in front of everyone, she still had a job to do and bills to pay and a sick grandmother depending on her. Nobody in that room knew that the 25-year-old woman cleaning up broken glass on her hands and knees was about to change everything they thought they knew about power and justice and karma, because sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales when you least expect it. Maya had been working at the Sterling Oak restaurant for 3 years, and she had seen plenty of rude customers. But Richard Caldwell was something else entirely as he continued his tirade while she cleaned. "Look at you crawling on the floor where you belong. This is exactly why people like you should stay in your place instead of trying to work in establishments meant for successful people." His words were poison, and several other diners looked away in embarrassment, while some pulled out their phones to record the scene, because cruelty had become entertainment in this modern world. Maya's hands bled from the broken glass, but she didn't stop cleaning because she needed this job more than she needed her dignity right now, or at least that's what she told herself as tears finally escaped down her cheeks. The restaurant manager, Mr. Peterson, rushed over with his face pale and his hands wringing together nervously, because Richard Caldwell was not just any customer, but a man who had invested heavily in the restaurant and had the power to destroy careers with a single phone call. "Mr. Caldwell, I am so terribly sorry. Please let me handle this situation, and I assure you there will be consequences for this unacceptable service." Mr. Peterson's voice was shaky and desperate as he grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her up roughly while she stumbled and more glass cut into her palm. Maya looked into her manager's eyes and saw no compassion there, only fear and greed, and the same ugly prejudice that had followed her every day of her life in this city, where your skin color often mattered more than your character. "I want her fired immediately," Richard Caldwell demanded as he brushed imaginary dust off his $1,000 suit, while his dinner companion, a blonde woman dripping in diamonds, nodded eagerly beside him. "People like her are the reason standards are dropping everywhere. She probably can't even read the menu properly." The other woman laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound that made Maya's stomach turn, because she had graduated top of her class and had dreams bigger than this restaurant, bigger than these small-minded people could ever imagine. Mr. Peterson nodded quickly and turned to Maya with cold eyes that held no trace of the friendly boss who had complimented her work ethic just yesterday. "Maya, you're done here. Clean out your locker and leave immediately. We cannot have staff who embarrass our valued guests." The words hit Maya like physical blows, and she stood there, in her stained uniform with blood dripping from her hands, and her heart breaking into pieces, because this job had been her lifeline while she saved money for college and took care of her grandmother who raised her after her parents died. The other waiters and waitresses looked away, unable to meet her eyes, because they all knew this was wrong, but nobody wanted to risk their own jobs by speaking up, and that's how injustice survives in silence and fear. Maya walked toward the back of the restaurant with her head held high, even though inside she was crumbling because her grandmother had taught her that dignity was something nobody could take away unless you gave it to them. She passed the kitchen where her friend Carlos, the line cook, mouthed, "I'm sorry," but stayed quiet because he had 3 kids to feed, and Maya understood even though it hurt. In the small staff room, she sat on the bench and finally let herself cry real deep sobs that shook her whole body because the unfairness of it all was too much to bear. She had been carrying a tray of drinks when Richard Caldwell had suddenly stood up without looking and crashed right into her, but somehow it had become her fault and her failure and her reason for termination. Her phone buzzed in her locker, and she saw 3 missed calls from her brother Jaden, but she couldn't talk to him right now because he would hear the pain in her voice and he would worry, and she had spent their whole lives trying not to be a burden to the big brother who had already sacrificed so much for her. Maya didn't know that Jaden was at that very moment sitting in a lawyer's office signing the final papers that made him the new owner of the Sterling Oak restaurant along with 15 other properties across New York, because her brother had kept his recent success quiet, not wanting to change the humble relationship they shared. Jaden Monroe was 32 years old and had built his fortune from absolutely nothing through a combination of brilliant business instinct, relentless hard work, and an unshakable belief that success was the best revenge against a world that had tried to keep him down. He had started with a small tech company in his garage, and through innovation and determination, had grown it into a multi-billion-dollar empire that now included real estate, technology, restaurants, and charitable foundations that helped kids from backgrounds just like his. His charming personality and genuine kindness had won him respect even from competitors, and his face had been on the cover of Forbes magazine just last month with the headline, "The Billionaire Who Never Forgot Where He Came From." But none of that mattered as much to Jaden as his little sister Maya, who he had raised after their parents died in a car accident when she was 8 and he was 15. He had worked 3 jobs to keep them together, had fought off social services who wanted to separate them, and had made sure Maya never went without, even if it meant he went hungry himself. Now Maya was his whole world, and even though his calendar was packed with meetings and deals and opportunities, he always made time for her weekly Sunday dinners where they laughed and talked, and she told him about her dreams of becoming a lawyer who would fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The lawyer slid the final document across the mahogany desk and smiled at Jaden with the kind of respect that money commands in this world. "Congratulations, Mr. Monroe. You are now the owner of the Sterling Oak and 14 other premium properties. This makes you one of the largest restaurant owners in New York." Jaden signed his name with the gold pen that had been a gift from his first major investor and felt a surge of satisfaction because this particular restaurant had special meaning to him. 20 years ago, when he was 12 years old, he had stood outside the Sterling Oak with his nose pressed against the glass, watching wealthy people eat fancy food, and he had promised himself that one day he would own a place like this and make sure everyone was treated with respect regardless of how much money they had in their pockets. His phone buzzed and he saw the missed calls from Maya, but a text message came through that said, "I'm okay, just tired, talk later," which seemed normal enough. Except Jaden had a sixth sense when it came to his sister, and something felt off. He excused himself from the meeting and called Maya back, but it went straight to voicemail, and that worried feeling in his gut grew stronger because Maya always answered his calls, always. Maya sat in the staff room for what felt like hours, but was really only 20 minutes, and tried to figure out how she would tell her grandmother that she had lost another job. This was the fourth time in 2 years that something like this had happened. And each time it had been because of customers who treated her badly because of her skin, color, and managers who cared more about money than justice. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Richard Caldwell standing in the doorway, with a smirk on his face that made her skin crawl. "I wanted to make sure you actually left because people like you have a habit of lingering where you're not wanted." His voice was smooth and cruel, and Maya stood up, because she would not let this man see her sitting down like she was beneath him. "I'm leaving, Mr. Caldwell, and I hope you enjoy your dinner, knowing that you destroyed someone's livelihood over an accident that wasn't even their fault." Her voice was steady and strong, and for just a moment, Richard Caldwell's smirk faltered because he hadn't expected this beautiful young woman to have such fire in her eyes. "You should watch your tone. Do you know how many connections I have in this city? I could make sure you never work in any decent establishment again." He stepped closer, and Maya could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the champagne arrogance that oozed from every pore. "Is that supposed to scare me?" Maya asked, and even she was surprised by her own courage because fear had ruled so much of her life. But suddenly standing there with nothing left to lose, she found strength she didn't know she had. "You think you're powerful because you have money and connections, but real power comes from character and integrity and kindness, and those are things you clearly know nothing about." Richard Caldwell's face turned red with anger, and he raised his hand like he might actually strike her, but a voice from behind stopped him cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Carlos, the line cook, stood there with his phone out recording everything, and behind him were 3 other kitchen staff members, all with their phones raised. "We saw what really happened out there, Mr. Caldwell, and we got it all on video, including you standing up without looking and causing the accident." Richard Caldwell's hand dropped, and his eyes darted between the phones and Maya's face, which now showed something he hadn't seen before: hope. "You're all fired," he screamed, but Carlos just laughed and said, "You can't fire us, buddy, because you don't own this place, you just eat here." The tension in that small room was electric, and Maya felt tears coming again, but this time they were different because people were finally standing up for her and with her. Richard Caldwell stormed out of the staff room, muttering threats and curses, while Carlos and the others gathered around, Maya asking if she was okay and helping her bandage her cut hands. "Why did you all risk your jobs for me?" Maya asked through tears because she couldn't understand why people she barely knew would put themselves in danger to defend her. "Because it was right," said Maria, the pastry chef, who was a 60-year-old grandmother with kind eyes. "And because we're tired of watching bullies win. Maybe we all get fired, but at least we'll know we stood for something." The others nodded, and Maya felt overwhelming gratitude for these brave souls who chose justice over fear. Outside in the dining room, Mr. Peterson was desperately trying to calm Richard Caldwell down while other diners whispered and pointed, because the scene had caused quite a disruption to their elegant evening. "I want those people fired immediately. Every single one of them. And I want that girl arrested for assault." Richard Caldwell was screaming so loud that people on the street outside could hear him through the windows. Mr. Peterson nodded frantically and pulled out his phone to call security, but before he could dial, a tall, handsome black man in an impeccably tailored navy suit walked through the front door with such commanding presence that the entire restaurant fell silent. Jaden Monroe had a way of entering a room that made everyone pay attention, not because he demanded it, but because genuine confidence and power radiated from him like light from the sun. He had gotten a strange feeling after Maya's text and decided to drive to the Sterling Oak to surprise her and maybe take her out for late-night coffee after her shift, because that's what big brothers did when they sensed something was wrong. The hostess rushed toward him with a professional smile because she recognized him from magazines and news articles, even though he hadn't yet announced his ownership. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Sterling Oak. Do you have a reservation?" Her voice was sweet, but Jaden barely heard her, because his eyes were scanning the room, looking for his sister, and instead, finding chaos and anger and a red-faced white man screaming at the manager. "I'm looking for Maya Thompson. She works here as a waitress." Jaden's voice was calm but firm, and the hostess's smile faltered because that name had just become very controversial in the last half hour. "I'm sorry, sir, but that employee is no longer with us, and I must ask you to leave if you don't have a reservation." She tried to sound professional, but her voice shook, slightly because there was something about this tall, handsome man that commanded respect. "What do you mean she's no longer with you? Where is my sister?" Jaden's voice rose slightly, and suddenly the manager, Mr. Peterson, appeared looking flustered and nervous. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down, or I'll call security." But before Jaden could respond, Richard Caldwell turned around, and his eyes lit up with malicious glee. "Another one. Let me guess you're here to defend your sister, the incompetent waitress who ruined my evening. Well, you can both get out, because this restaurant is for people of class and distinction." The words hung in the air like poison, and Jaden felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm, because losing his temper would only make things worse. "I don't know who you are, but I suggest you watch how you speak about my sister." Jaden's voice was ice cold, and something in his tone made even Richard Caldwell take a small step back. The dining room had gone completely silent now because everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen, and people were recording on their phones, knowing that whatever came next would probably end up going viral by morning. Mr. Peterson stepped between them, trying to defuse the situation, because the last thing he needed was a physical altercation in his restaurant. "Gentlemen, please, let's all calm down. I'm sure we can resolve this situation like adults." But Jaden wasn't interested in the manager's weak attempts at peacekeeping because he needed to find Maya and make sure she was okay. "I'm not going anywhere until I see my sister, and someone better explain to me right now what happened." His voice carried such authority that Mr. Peterson actually stuttered when he tried to respond. "Your sister was involved in an incident with Mr. Caldwell, who is a very important investor and valued customer, and unfortunately, due to her unacceptable behavior, she has been terminated." The manager's words were rushed and nervous, and Jaden felt his blood boiling, because he knew without even hearing the full story that this was about prejudice and power and all the ugly things he had been fighting against his entire life. Richard Caldwell stepped forward with renewed confidence because he assumed the manager's support meant he had won. "Your sister is a clumsy, incompetent fool who doesn't belong in a fine establishment like this. Maybe you should teach her some manners before she tries to work in civilized society." The words had barely left Richard Caldwell's mouth when Maya emerged from the back hallway with Carlos and the other staff members behind her, and the moment Jaden saw his little sister's tear-stained face and bandaged hands, he felt rage unlike anything he had experienced in years. Maya's eyes widened when she saw her brother standing in the middle of the dining room, and she tried to wave him off because she didn't want him involved in her problems, but it was too late, because Jaden was already crossing the room toward her. "Maya, what happened to your hands? Who did this to you?" His voice was gentle when he spoke to her, but his eyes were blazing when he looked back at Richard Caldwell and the manager. "It's okay, Jaden, I just want to go home." Maya's voice was small and tired, and it broke Jaden's heart because his strong, independent sister sounded defeated. "It's not okay, Maya, and we're not going anywhere until I understand what happened here." He pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted exactly 15 seconds. "David, I need you at the Sterling Oak immediately with the ownership papers." Then he hung up and turned to face the crowded dining room with such commanding presence that even the people eating their meals put down their forks to pay attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your evening, but I think you all deserve to know what kind of establishment you're dining in." Jaden's voice carried to every corner of the restaurant, and Mr. Peterson's face went pale, because he suddenly had a terrible feeling about where this was going. My name is Jaden Monroe, and as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, I became the owner of the Sterling Oak, along with 14 other properties across New York. The gasps that went through the dining room were audible, and Richard Caldwell's smug expression melted away like ice cream in the summer sun. That's impossible. The CEO sputtered, but Jaden ignored him and continued speaking. What happened here tonight is a disgrace. My sister Maya Thompson is one of the most hardworking, honest, kind people I know, and she was humiliated and fired because of an accident that wasn't her fault and because of prejudice that has no place in any establishment I own. Maya stood frozen in shock because her brother had never told her about buying restaurants, and suddenly everything made sense about why he had been so busy lately and so secretive about his business deals. Mr. Peterson tried to speak, but Jaden held up his hand for silence. I have reviewed the security footage from my car where I watched it on my phone, and I can see clearly that Mr. Caldwell stood up without looking and crashed into my sister, causing her to drop the tray. And yet she was blamed, fired, and humiliated while this man was coddled because of his money and connections. Richard Caldwell's face had gone from red to white, and he looked around the room, desperately seeking support, but finding only shocked faces and recording phones. Now wait just a minute. I'm a major investor in this restaurant, and I demand respect. His voice was shaky, now lacking the confidence it had held just minutes ago. Jaden smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. You were an investor, Mr. Caldwell, but as the new owner, my first decision is to refund your investment and ban you permanently from this establishment and any other property I own. As for demanding respect, let me tell you something about respect. It's earned through character and kindness, not purchased with money. The entire restaurant erupted in applause, and several diners stood up to cheer while Richard Caldwell stood there looking like a deflated balloon. His dinner companion, the blonde woman in diamonds, quietly gathered her purse and slipped out the door, clearly not wanting to be associated with a man who had just been publicly humiliated. Mr. Peterson tried one last desperate attempt to save his job. Mr. Monroe, I was simply following protocol and trying to protect the restaurant's interests. Surely you can understand my position. But Jaden's expression was stone cold when he looked at the manager who had so quickly thrown Maya away. What I understand, Mr. Peterson, is that you chose money over justice and cruelty over compassion, and those are not qualities I want in anyone who represents my businesses. You're fired, effective immediately. The manager's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out because there was nothing to say in the face of such absolute judgment. Jaden turned to Carlos and the other staff members who had defended Maya. As for you brave people who risked your jobs to stand up for what's right, I'm giving each of you a $5,000 bonus and a promotion, because that's the kind of character I want in my establishments. The kitchen staff cheered and hugged each other while tears of joy and relief streamed down their faces. Maya stood watching all of this in complete shock, because her quiet evening shift had turned into something out of a movie, and she couldn't quite process that her brother, the person she loved most in the world, had just swooped in like a superhero to save the day. Jaden crossed to her and gently took her bandaged hands in his. I'm so sorry you had to go through this, Maya. Nobody should ever treat you that way, and I promise you that things are going to change, not just here, but everywhere I have influence. You bought a restaurant? Maya's voice was small and confused, and Jaden laughed through his own tears, because leave it to his sister to focus on that detail in the middle of all this chaos. I bought 15 restaurants, Maya, and the only reason I didn't tell you was because I wanted to surprise you and because I wanted to make sure everything was perfect before I shared the news. I was actually planning to make you the manager of this location once you finished college, Because I know how much you love the hospitality industry. Maya started crying again, but these were happy tears, mixed with overwhelmed tears and grateful tears all jumbled together. I don't know what to say, Jaden. You didn't have to do all this for me. But Jaden shook his head firmly. Yes, I did, Maya, because you're my sister and you're the reason I work so hard and build all this success. What good is having money and power if I can't use it to protect the people I love and fight against injustice? Brother and sister hugged in the middle of the dining room while the customers applauded and several people wiped tears from their own eyes, because witnessing real love and justice was rare and beautiful. Richard Caldwell tried to slink toward the door, but Jaden's voice stopped him. Mr. Caldwell, before you leave, I want you to apologize to my sister for your behavior. The CEO turned around with indignation flashing in his eyes. I will do no such thing. I still have connections in this city, and you haven't heard the last of me. But Jaden just smiled that same cold smile. Actually, Mr. Caldwell, I think you'll find that your connections aren't as strong as you believe. You see, I happen to sit on the board of directors for 3 companies, where you're currently seeking contracts, and I also happen to be close personal friends with the mayor, the police commissioner, and the owner of the largest newspaper in New York. So I suggest you apologize sincerely to my sister, or I can promise you that your reputation and career will suffer consequences you can't even imagine. The threat hung in the air, heavy and real, and Richard Caldwell suddenly realized he had made an enemy of someone far more powerful than he had ever imagined. His shoulders slumped in defeat, and he turned to face Maya with shame finally showing in his eyes. I apologize, Miss Thompson, for my behavior this evening. It was inexcusable and wrong, and I'm deeply sorry. His voice was quiet and broken, and while Maya didn't feel particularly forgiving, she nodded acceptance, because holding on to anger would only poison her own heart. After Richard Caldwell left with his tail between his legs, Jaden gathered all the staff members for an impromptu meeting right there in the dining room. I know this evening has been chaotic and stressful, but I want you all to understand what kind of restaurant this is going to be moving forward. The Sterling Oak will be a place where everyone is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their race, religion, background, or bank account. We will serve excellent food and provide excellent service, but we will never ever sacrifice our values for money or status. The staff applauded, and Jaden continued. Starting tomorrow, we will implement new training programs, better wages, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. I want this restaurant to be known not just for its food, but for its heart and soul. Maya watched her brother speak and felt overwhelming pride, because this was the same boy who had shared his school lunch with her every day, even when it meant he went hungry, and now he was a man using his power to make the world better for everyone, not just himself. The customers who had witnessed everything began approaching Jaden and Maya to congratulate them and share their own stories of experiencing or witnessing discrimination, and several people canceled their meals at other restaurants and made new reservations to return to the Sterling Oak because they wanted to support a business that stood for something meaningful. Later that night, after the restaurant closed and the staff went home, Jaden and Maya sat together in a booth sharing a late meal prepared by Carlos, who had insisted on cooking something special for them. I still can't believe you own restaurants now, Maya said between bites of the most delicious pasta she had ever tasted. I can't believe you didn't tell me you were working here, Jaden countered with a smile. I thought you were still at the bookstore. Maya looked down at her plate, feeling embarrassed. I didn't want to worry you, Jaden. You've done so much for me already, and I wanted to prove I could take care of myself. Jaden reached across the table and took her hand. Maya, you don't have to prove anything to me or anyone else. You're smart, beautiful, kind, and strong, and you're going to do amazing things with your life. But you never have to face challenges alone, because we're family, and family shows up for each other, always. They talked for hours about their dreams and fears and the journey that had brought them from that small apartment, where they had barely survived, to this moment of triumph and vindication. Maya told her brother about her plans to apply to law school, and Jaden promised to support her completely financially and emotionally through every step of that journey. As the sun began to rise over New York City, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jaden and Maya walked out of the Sterling Oak together, feeling like they could conquer the world. The story of what happened that night spread quickly through social media and news outlets, and by noon the next day, videos of Jaden's speech and Richard Caldwell's humiliation had gone viral, with millions of views and thousands of comments supporting the Monroe siblings. Richard Caldwell tried to repair his reputation, but the damage was done, and 3 companies canceled their contracts with him within a week, while his own board of directors asked for his resignation, citing behavior unbecoming of a leader. Meanwhile, the Sterling Oak became the hottest restaurant reservation in New York, with a 6-month waiting list and people from all over the country wanting to eat at the place, where justice had been served along with excellent food. Maya was offered admission to 5 top law schools with full scholarships, and she accepted Columbia so she could stay close to her brother and her grandmother, who cried happy tears when she heard about her granddaughter's success. 6 months later, the Sterling Oak held a special celebration dinner to honor the staff members who had stood up for Maya and to announce new scholarship programs for young people from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to work in the hospitality industry. Maya gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes about dignity and courage, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it costs you something. I learned that night that real power doesn't come from money or position, but from character, and the courage to use whatever power you have to lift others up, instead of pushing them down. Her words were simple but profound, and they resonated with everyone in that room and everyone who watched the speech online, where it was shared millions of times. Jaden stood in the back watching his sister shine and felt grateful for every struggle they had endured, because those struggles had shaped them into people who valued justice and compassion above all else. The restaurant business continued to grow and thrive under Jaden's leadership, and he made sure that every single establishment he owned operated according to the same principles of respect and dignity that he had announced that fateful night. Years later, when Maya graduated from law school at the top of her class and opened her own practice fighting for civil rights and justice for people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers, she often thought back to that night at the Sterling Oak. She thought about how one moment of cruelty had led to an opportunity for justice, and how her brother's love and support had given her the courage to keep fighting even when the world seemed dark and unfair. The story of the arrogant CEO and the waitress who turned out to be a billionaire's sister became legendary in New York and beyond, as a reminder that you never know who you're dealing with, and more importantly, that every person deserves to be treated with respect regardless of their position or appearance. Maya hung a photo in her office of her and Jaden standing in front of the Sterling Oak on opening night after the renovations, and whenever she felt discouraged or tired, she looked at that photo and remembered that justice might not always be immediate, but it always comes eventually for those who never stop believing in it. The restaurant continued to thrive as a beacon of hope and excellence, proving that businesses could be both profitable and principled, and that success measured in character and positive impact was far more valuable than success measured only in dollars. And sometimes late at night, when Maya walked past the Sterling Oak on her way home from a long day of fighting for justice in the courtroom, she smiled and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for that terrible, wonderful night when everything changed, and she learned that dignity and courage and family Love were the most powerful forces in the world.